Canada is expected to bring in 500,000 immigrants over the next few years, and of course the biggest chunk of them is expected to settle in southern Ontario. They will need places to live. The question is there enough land and proposed housing already in the pipeline, or, as the provincial government claims, do we need to open up the Greenbelt more to accommodate this influx? Let's discuss that with Jane Fogal, local and regional councillor for Halton Region, Rob Horne, former planning commissioner for the Region of Waterloo, and Chris Spoke, founder and CEO of the digital product studio August, and a Toronto-based real estate developer. And as I welcome you all here to our program tonight, I always got to do this full disclosure thing. In the interest of full disclosure before we start, I always like to point out my brother is a home builder developing a parcel of land that was just removed from the Greenbelt in Grimsby, east of Hamilton. So we put that on the table for everybody's edification. And with that, Mr. Director, can we please see the Greenbelt? There it is. Look how far it goes east. For those who are listening on podcast, you can't see. There's a big green swath of land that goes all around the west end of Lake Ontario, on the north side of the lake from the Oak Ridges Moraine all the way around the south side of the lake to Niagara River, 325 kilometers worth of protected land. Now let's hit the main question off the top. Do we have enough land already available to accommodate future growth, or do we need to open up, as the province suggests, parts of that Greenbelt in order to accommodate more development? Jane, get us started.
Well, thank you. Absolutely, we have enough land already in the pipeline. We've got probably more land than Ontario has ever had that's been designated for future development. And now we have the Kevin Eby report that's looked at the official plan updates and all the land that was designated there, but not just designated, all the land that we had before the new designation would be adequate for supplying 2 million new homes.
2 million.
2 million.
And the target's 1.5 million.
That's right.
So you think we got more than enough?
Absolutely, we have way more than enough.
Chris, what say you?
Yeah, I think we could accommodate population growth in Toronto if we were prepared to upzone Toronto sufficiently. So Paris has, I think, 5 times more more dense population than Toronto does.
Paris, France.
Paris, France. So if you kind of applied that to Toronto, we could fit, maybe 10 more million people in Toronto itself. I think the problem is that we have these land use rules within the city and within all cities that constrain new housing supply. So when you think about this calculation, I think of it as we could build tall within cities, and I think that's preferred, and I'd love to do more of that. We could build sprawl, maybe even including into the Greenbelt, or we could build a wall, and we could stop immigration. And the way I think about it is that order in which I said that's my preference. I think we should build tall to the extent that we can, but I'd rather build sprawl than nothing at all, or have to build a wall and kind of reduce immigration or something like that.
But it's your view that we're not building tall enough in Toronto, and therefore, if that's the case, then we may have to look at other options.
Correct. I mean, there's this term in Toronto, we have the Green Belt, in Toronto we have the Yellow Belt, right? The neighborhood's land use designation in the official plan, where you can't really intensify, at least not yet. And I think that if you want to be pro-Green Belt, which I generally am, you have to be anti-Yellow Belt, and you have to kind of like pair the need for there being less sprawl with a need for there being more infill development and taller buildings within cities.
Okay, Rob, what say you?
Yeah, so my full disclosure as well, I represent the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario at this table as well, which is basically the planning chiefs for the single-tier cities and regions, and they represent about 80% of the population. The short answer is no.
We don't need to open the
RPCO, and personally, I don't think there's any need to open the Greenbelt as a way to address the housing needs. I know we'll get into talking about it, but even if we just start with the numbers, 50,000 housing units is about 3.3% of the $1.5 million target. And I think as we get into the discussion, we can talk about where might we otherwise find those 50,000, let alone let's talk about how important this $2 million acre assembly of land is to Ontarians.
How are you so sure that we don't need to open up the Greenbelt? Because the province is quite adamant that we do need to do that.
Yeah, and there's been lots of discussion about inventory and capacity, and the Regional Planning Commissioners actually undertook the exercise of determining how much housing is unbuilt and in the pipe, and that means a building permit is available today or formal applications are in the process. Our number was 1.25 million housing units, which represents 85% of the province's 1.5 million unit goal.
That's in the pipeline already.
in the pipeline or approved. So this is year 2 of the 10-year program.
Okay,
And we sit at 85%.
I get you, but you know the expression, just because it's happening in the paper, just because it's happening on paper doesn't mean it's happening on the ground.
Absolutely. And our PCO's contention,
PCO's is what?
The Regional Planning Commissioner's
Okay.
contention, mine as well, is we need to stop focusing on numbers. We need to start focusing on getting shovels in the ground.
All right, that takes me back to Jane. You know that the province has suggested that some municipalities are not fast enough with their approvals. They're gumming up the works, there are too many regulations, there are too many development charges and so on, and that's slowing things down inordinately so. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that we can do better, for sure. But you have to also realize that developers have this pipeline, as Rob was saying, and they have building permits and they're not building. Like
Why not?
Well, like a business that it needs that pipeline to keep steady business going. You know, you've only got so many workers and so much product. You want to have it all lined up, and that's the pipeline. So they're building a lot of houses now. Then they've got the permits. That'll be the next houses. Beyond that, we've got the land it's got planning done on it, but they haven't pulled any permits yet, but they will get to it. And on down to land that's designated residential that we haven't planned yet. So it's this huge pipeline is moving along. But we can't make the builders build faster than they want to.
Well, let me take that to Chris. You know, we do have a bit of a labor shortage here. We do have higher interest rates now than we did a few years ago. Mm-hmm. Are those things and other things combining to slow down what's going through the pipeline?
Yeah, I think so. And very timely, there was a piece published at TVO.org by Steve LaFleur and Joseph Filipowicz on this question, like how many of these units that are in this pipeline as being deemed, an application was been made, but they're not yet under construction, so where exactly do they sit? And what often happens is the slower the municipal entitlement process is, the longer it takes, the higher you are, the higher the risk is that by the time you're at the end of it, your pro forma no longer works, right? There's construction cost escalation that are way beyond what you budgeted for. You have interest rate hikes that are not what you anticipated. I mentioned that when I'm not, or you mentioned in my intro that when I'm not building websites in my day job, I do infill development in Toronto. And we're in this situation where we started a process with the city before the first rate hike, and our monthly debt service payments are much higher today than they were then. And there's going to be some point where we complete our rezoning, where we have to launch a sales center and sell condos into a market where people aren't really buying condos, not at the prices that you would need to justify construction.
Rob, fair points?
Yeah, fair points, absolutely. In fact, there's always room for improvement. So municipalities have been taking advantage of something called the Streamlining Development Approvals Fund, which the province made available to make their processes better. If you go to rpco.ca, you'll see a report we did called Making Room, which also talks about having good liaison with the development industry to say, where are the bottlenecks and what are they affecting? And so, yeah, there's absolutely room for improvement. I think as we start to understand the process better, we're also very interested in putting together what we call a chess clock approach, which is the municipality has finished a certain amount of work, it pushes their timer, it's now in the developer's hands or the applicant's hands, and you get a much truer sense of where the bottlenecks are.
Well, Chris, explain this to me, though. If the idea is to get stuff built faster, how can it possibly be faster to build in what used to be the Greenbelt when none of that land is serviced yet?
Yeah, well, one big reason, nobody lives in the Greenbelt. Therefore, there's no community opposition in the Greenbelt. It's much easier and much faster to build where you don't have to navigate this kind of political calculus of your neighbors not wanting you to build.
There's no local opposition.
There's no local opposition.
But there's plenty of province-wide environmental group opposition.
There is.
People who don't want building in the Greenbelt at all.
Yeah, but the most intense fights are typically the most local. They're the ones that have the ear of the local councillor and are able to kind of, we have this regional mandate to build more housing, and yet a local councillor, because of very hyper-local considerations, will oppose housing development. So the local, I think, is still important. I would love for it to be much easier to build in Toronto. I do think we have a lot of space to intensify Toronto, but that's why. That's why people are going out, is because they're not facing the NIMBY problem.
Gotcha. Rob, there is something called strategic blocking, in which some developers, I gather, own land. They have approval for development on the land, but they are not building. Maybe this is getting back to what Jane was saying a moment ago, but they are not actually building on that land because of something called strategic blocking. What is that?
Well, let me start by reframing a little bit. So here's the context. I think everyone is very positional and tends to vilify. And I think we have to remind ourselves that most of the housing market is free enterprise based. There are a relatively small number of developers who hold most of the land, and they're not compelled. Municipalities can't make developers build.
Do you want to take a run at that question?
The first question?
Strategic blocking?
Yeah, I think, so I don't know what that term specifically refers to. I do think there are, again, as I mentioned, developers who end this entitlement process with the required approvals needed to build and then find themselves in a position where the project no longer makes sense given their cost basis. And that's a tough problem to solve, and it's made worse the longer it takes for that entitlement process to go through, because there's more uncertainty the more you kind of project out into the future. So I mean, one thing that's worth mentioning is that the way that we tax property, this is certainly true in Toronto, is MPAC assesses the highest and best use of your land and then kind of applies the property tax accordingly. So if you have a piece of land that gets upzoned, MPAC will determine that it's a higher density site and tax it more. And I think that's a good incentive to get people building.
Let me speculate here, Jane. Let me speculate that there are developers who own land who won't build on that land unless they get the local municipality to put the servicing on their land and therefore increase the value of their land. And if you don't do that, they're not going to build on that land. How much of that happens?
Well, in Halton, that's not the way it works at all. We actually have the developers as part of our finance plan for that infrastructure, and they front-end finance it. So until we get that financing in place and get working on it, then nothing is going to happen. But as soon as that gets built, they have built that infrastructure, so they want to get building.
Okay, I guess what I mean is, should there be a clock? You talked about a chess clock. Should there be a clock that starts once a developer gets approval to build on a land, so that they can't just sit on it for as long as they want to? You got approval to build. If you don't build within 3 years, you lose your approval. Should we do that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure how that would work out legally if you have given them the right to build. Is there a time clock on it? I don't think so. I think it's still free market. I'm not sure what that would do if we had a time clock.
Do you want that chess clock to work in that case?
I would. But there's a middle step that we haven't talked about, and that really is the whole suite of things that we can do as a group to bring affordable housing on. So I think government is really good at announcements and light on implementation. And I think it's proving true now, but I think this is an enormous opportunity for us. Accessory units. If I'm a homeowner, I want to know what are building and fire code requirements. And personally, I want to make sure every unit created is safe. I want to have something well designed. I want to know tax impact, as Chris said. So help me unlock the potential in my property. Secondly, we are talking about a much greater scale with the amount of immigration that is expected. And let's be honest, most of it's probably going to be Ontario and BC based. So how can we engage the home building industry, because they are best at building homes, to build affordable housing at scale? So what kind of new partnerships are we talking about? And when we talk about scale, we're not talking about the very valuable nonprofits and co-ops. We're talking about big scale development. Just an example. So the way the means of creating partnerships is really quite a foil against the federal announcement of $4 billion last week to create 100,000 units. I mean, that is a staggering amount of money to create 100,000 units. And remember, we're talking about 1.5 million units in Ontario alone.
Right. Can I ask you, Chris, I want to circle back to something that Rob said a moment ago about whether the private sector is actually able to contribute to / solve the affordability housing problem.
Yeah.
Do you think they can?
Yeah, I think the question is, what percentage of society needs some sort of subsidy, right? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Because right now we're getting close to like 40%. And I think what the market can do is push that percentage down, where if you increase the supply of homes, it puts downward pressure on prices. We've seen this throughout history. 10 years ago, it was much more affordable to buy or rent a market unit, housing unit than it is today, right? And that's not because there's less subsidy, it's because it's harder to build market rate housing. So I think there will always be some portion of society that requires support, but we want that portion to be as small as possible because support is expensive. So let's let the market do what they do, build as much housing as we need, And for those people who can't make it onto that first rung, yes, let's subsidize it.
If the province had said, we're going to open up development in the Greenbelt, but we're only going to have affordable housing built there, would you have been more sympathetic to their position?
No.
Still no?
No. I mean, we got the growth plan, and it was telling us that we had to build differently in Ontario, that we had to stop that sprawl. All that sprawl had to stop. So they said, okay, now you've got to start developing more densely in the built-up area. At the same time, they gave us the Greenbelt. And if you look at the Greenbelt legislation, it says, we are telling you where you shall not build. This is too important, this property that has all this ecological benefits to us. It is too valuable to society to build on it. We have all the other space to build all that affordable housing. And it should be within the built-up area where you have services, where you have transit, where you have ethnic groups that grow around certain areas. That's where they want to live. Not out in the Greenbelt where there's no bus coming. That's a silly place to put affordable housing.
How does that sound to you?
Yeah, I think since the growth plan was enacted and the Greenbelt Act, this was 2005, this is the point that I've heard made on this show, most Toronto neighborhoods have lost population because we've not had this sufficient permissions to intensify. And when you've had like a family of 5 in a house and now it's like one widow or like a couple and the kids have moved out, we're not able to divide those into multi-unit housings or to build new multi-unit housing. And I think that something has to give. And again, if we want to build tall, let's build tall. But I'd still rather, this is kind of like mix it up here, I'd still rather sprawl than do nothing at all. I'm radically pro-immigration, and I'd rather have people moving into the Greenbelt and not being able to move to Ontario at all.
Well, Rob, I think I need you to speak to one of the ironies around all of this, which is one of the reasons that the province is opening up land to the Greenbelt, they say, is because, apropos of Chris's point, for example, some city councillors in Toronto don't want to intensify their neighborhoods enough. So ironically, the same people who are protesting against building in the Greenbelt are also protesting intensifying their neighborhoods. People got to live somewhere. What do you do about that conundrum?
It's a fine line. We've heard lots of discussion prior to accessory units being put in place to say how much is enough. Chris has talked about 6-story as of right everywhere. I mean, it's a question with many different answers. But I do think it could be viewed as somewhat paradoxical that we have that situation. But I think underlying everything, though, there is an elephant in the room. And that elephant in the room is infrastructure. So regardless of what we think the best plan is for Ontario, if municipalities can't collect full development charges, development infrastructure will not get built, or it will not get built for many years, or it might get built in the wrong place. And that will undermine everything we do. So, I'm very focused on somehow making municipalities whole for the infrastructure deficit that they are going to be experiencing. And it's already happening. And it will be in the billions of dollars, billion with a B.
But apropos of the point I made, do you find it a little rich that there are people who are living in bungalows right near subway stations on the Danforth in Toronto, for example, who say, don't open up the Greenbelt, but we can't intensify my neighborhood at all either?
Sure. I mean, change has always been hard for people, always. But that's why I put such focus on accessory units and excellence in design. And I think that's one of the things we need to help property owners help themselves, and demonstrate that they're not compromising the community.
Okay, can I put a very sticky issue on the table here? And that is, we all well remember Doug Ford, before he was Premier, on video caught saying, this is 4.5 years ago now, we're going to open up the Greenbelt, we're going to put development there. And then the reaction by so many people in society was so negative, he said, okay, I've heard you, we're not going to do it. And now he's doing it. The question is this happening as a quid pro quo to developers who have contributed significantly to the coffers of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario? That's the question. Who wants to speculate on that? Jane, you're in politics. Go ahead.
Well, I'm struggling to find out the reason to go to the Greenbelt at all, because there's tens of thousands of other acres available that's not in the Greenbelt. So why would you go to where you've said you won't go and where the legislation says thou shalt not build? We've got tons of farm fields out there that aren't in the Greenbelt. Why not go there? So I can't find a reason why they would go to the Greenbelt. Minister Clark, when asked what's the justification, said, well, we're leaving no stone unturned to get affordable housing. And I'm going, well, really, there are a lot of other stones out there that you haven't unturned. Maybe you want get back in the business of building affordable housing as a province, which they used to do and should be their responsibility. So there's no justification at all. So in the end, I don't know, follow the money, I guess.
That's what Deep Throat told Woodward and Bernstein.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you think because developers have given money to the PC party, developers from York Region and Durham Region, that they've opened up the Greenbelt and allowed development there where they promised they wouldn't?
I don't know, but I will say that when Ford made that announcement to open up the Greenbelt, it was around the same time with Bill 23 that he announced that he would require all municipalities to allow for at least 3 units on any residential land. And I noticed kind of like the asymmetry in how much outrage the one announcement garnered versus the latter. I think it's much more outrageous that the province is not pushing cities farther to allow for more intensification than that we open up some of the Greenbelt. Whether he got paid off or not is above my pay grade. I'm a small-time builder in Toronto. I only do infill. That's like rarefied air. I have no idea what goes on there.
Okay. I know you don't want to have to deal with this question, which is all the more reason why I want to put it to you, but you've been around a while. No one's got any evidence or no one's got a smoking gun that said developer X contributed to the PC party and therefore Doug Ford changed his mind. But he did say 4 years ago, I've learned the lesson about this Greenbelt thing, and therefore there won't be any building there. And now there is. What do you think happened?
I don't know. I mean, I look at the democratic process. That's our government. We have checks and balances in place. So we're going to watch the Auditor General, have a look at value for money. We're going to watch the Integrity Commissioner, do some investigation, and potentially we'll see if the OPP decides to get involved. And I think we have to rely on that. I think the backdrop, though, in my opinion, is we talk about the Greenbelt notionally. The Greenbelt is really important, and people should understand it's important for really vital functions. We just finished a pandemic, or we're in the process of winding one down or winding along in a different way. We learned a lot about domestic supply chain, especially food supply chain. The Greenbelt's, it's rich in agricultural potential. Secondly, I do worry about catastrophic events. I worry about water drawdown. I worry about water contamination. And I worry about the magnitude of impact that something quite catastrophic, as I say, would be on the Greenbelt. But, my contention is that there are checks and balances in place. There are processes that are going to happen. And I will look forward to seeing the outcome of that.
As will we all. That's Rob Horne, former planning commissioner for the Region of Waterloo. On the right-hand side of the table, Jane Fogal, local and regional councillor for the Region of Municipality of Halton, and Chris Spoke, founder and CEO, Digital Product Studio August, and a Toronto-based real estate developer, on the other side of the table. Thanks, everybody, for coming into TVO for this conversation tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.